Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started in 1 minute. 1 minute.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I got the cue to start, and I just wanted to say my name is Mary Capusta. I'm the Director of Communications for the Calgary Public Library, and this is exactly the sort of event we should be having at a library. So we're so excited to have you all here, and what a great crowd. This is a great topic, and I'm excited to kind of sneak in and listen as well. On behalf of our staff, board, and volunteers, welcome to our Central Library. It's a pretty busy place, and these are the sorts of events that we love to host here. And so please learn more about what we have available. But before we get into the type of event that we're going to have tonight, I just want to acknowledge where we are. We're gathered at a place called Mokisnes, which is a Blackfoot word that means elbow. You can tell we're at the place, the landscape right around us, where the Elbow River meets the Bow River. In the spirit of respect and truth, we honor and acknowledge Mokisnes and recognize the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot people, the Nakota people of the Stoney Nation, the Beaver people of the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. This library is one of 21 libraries across the city built on this traditional land. Finally, I would just like to acknowledge all people who make their homes on Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. So we're saying we do lots of events like this. This library opened on November 1st, and I just got the updated stats. Over 1 million people have been through our doors since opening. Thank you. This library is a great example of what can happen when people come together and persevere and really allocate funding to really deliver impact and accessible programs. But of course, the library is much more than a beautiful new building. We're 21 locations that serve nearly 7 million people across Calgary. And why I'm so proud to be here and so eager to learn more about what's happening tonight is I'm proud to work at the library because we're a democratic institution that is focused on safe, welcoming spaces that are accessible and really embracing the library's ability to create an equal platform for everyone to have same opportunities. I'm always in awe of the work that our librarians do to remove barriers for instance, our early literacy programs, 90,000 kids under the age of 5 in Calgary, and we do know that there are things outside of their control that could certainly limit their ability to be ready for school. So if you want to learn more about early literacy, come by our library. We have 12 early learning centers across the city. We're also really proud of our programs for adults. Digital literacy, there's a lot of barriers for technology that could be beyond someone's control. So digital literacy in your community, we have educators that do small class group sizing that really look at providing not only access to technology, but also interpreting technology. So if you want to learn more about that, please visit calgarylibrary.ca. There's so many outreach programs, and a great thing about working at the library is we're always eager to partner. So if there's something we should know about, or if there's something that maybe we can provide help with, if you aren't aware of some of our free services at the library, it's all free with your library card. Free programs. Last year, just under 500,000 people took part in free programs, 20,000 free programs across the library. 20,000 online learning classes were taken, career development, literacy programs, all sorts of things can happen for free. Room bookings, did you know you can print for free with your library card, black and white and color, all locations. So if you don't have a library card, but I'm sure you all do, just please, you can get one outside the door, get one on our website. And also if you've had one and you haven't used it in a while, remember if you haven't used it in 3 years, it expires. So time to get a new one and discover all the sorts of things you can do with your library. I would love to thank the O'Brien Institute and Better Income for allowing us this opportunity and bringing this type of event for here at the library. Oh, sorry, not Better Income, Basic Income Calgary. Basic Income Calgary and the O'Brien Institute for bringing this type of programming here. And thank you and enjoy your evening.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Katrina Mullaney. I'm an assistant professor in the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. I'm also a member of the O'Brien Institute for Public Health and have been for about 5 years. Most of my research has been in the area of poverty and homelessness, and so I'm particularly pleased to be representing the O'Brien Institute and welcoming you this evening to this event. The O'Brien Institute has about 500 members from many universities, from many academic disciplines in health, but also social work, economics, and many, many others. We also have many members who work in healthcare, who work in community-based organizations, who work in government. And so I know there's a few of our members here this evening, so I'm happy to see that as well. The O'Brien Institute is particularly interested in research that impacts society in positive ways, whether that's through changing public policy, changing service delivery, improving the ways in which people are able to navigate health systems and social systems, and reduce barriers at the systems and structure levels. So a basic income program or approach is particularly important, I think, for improving and understanding people's well-being and for reducing some of those barriers. And so we're very pleased to be partnering with Basic Income Calgary on this event. In terms of our speakers this evening, this is a bit personal for me. Dr. Lynn McIntyre has been a mentor, probably one of the most influential mentors to me in my work, and has changed the shape of my research in lots of positive, impactful ways. So I'm always very excited to hear from Dr. McIntyre and looking forward to what she has to say about basic income. I met Dr. Forget for the first time tonight, but I have read quite a bit of your work, and I think your ideas around how to fund basic income, how we can look at the cost effectiveness of approaches like basic income will be particularly interesting for us to explore. And Mary Silvani, I've met a few times. Mary is a very active community activist in Calgary, and I've heard her speak at numerous community events around poverty reduction. And so, again, very interested to hear Mary's thoughts and insights tonight. So I guess on behalf of the O'Brien Institute, thank you again for including us, Basic Income Calgary, and I hope that you have an enjoyable evening, and it's a discussion that is rich and full of interesting thoughts, and welcome and enjoy. Thank you.
My name is Yvonne Stanford. I co-chair Basic Income Calgary Action Group, which is an action group of Basic Income Canada Network. Basic Income Calgary is composed of many community organizations, such as the Women's Centre of Calgary, the Disability Action Hall, Poverty Talks, the Alex Food Centre, Engineers Without Borders, Social Workers for Social Justice, Momentum, and we are a stakeholder group of VCC, Vibrant Cities Calgary, which is the home of our Enough for All poverty reduction strategy. So that's us, the Basic Income Calgary Action Group, and we are so pleased to have you here to learn with us, to discuss with us, to help us build a movement and to move forward. We're looking forward to your participation and ideas. I would like to introduce to you our MC for the evening, Matt Ewens. He told me to say that he pulled the short straw from our team of organizers, but I don't have to do what he says. I can say what I want. I've got the mic. So Matt Ewens is the founder and director of Human Elephants Canada Limited, which is a consulting firm whose mission is, listen to this, help those who help others. And he's been a part of our Make It Big convention committee for the past year on a sponsorship volunteer basis. I think he was chosen because he's talented, energetic, and really bossy. Matt Ewens, it's all yours.
So they've already gone rogue on me, so that makes my job. We break that right away. Thank you very much, Yvonne. I appreciate that. Hello, Calgary. How are we doing tonight? So let's get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. In the event of an emergency, we have two exits that we're going to be exiting this room. We have the exit that we all came in at the top of the stairs. We also have an exit out here. And how about we coordinate ourselves if we have to meet outside by those big bird rocky things. I'm not entirely sure what those are called, but we're going to meet by those things. Let's quickly talk about electronic devices. So social media is encouraged tonight. However, we frown upon long, drawn-out phone calls. So please make sure that your device is either set to mute or set to vibrate. Very, very much appreciate that. And this event is actually also being live streamed on YouTube, so a big hello to everyone playing along at home. And tonight's public forum, it's actually part of a larger conference that's happening tomorrow, and we've brought people from all across Alberta to take part in this event. So I'm just gonna see if we have anybody here from Lethbridge. You're so proud, you can hear you. All right, perfect. How about Grand Prairie? Grand Prairie? We got one. Fort McMurray. Is Fort McMurray here? No, okay. And we do have some other municipalities joining us, including Edmonton. Hello, Edmonton. So tonight we are, let's have a look here. So tonight, this is the agenda that we're at. As soon as I stop talking, we have our keynote by Dr. Evelyn Forget. Then we're going to move into a fireside chat. So Dr. Forget is going to be joined by Dr. Lynn McIntyre. And then we move into a panel discussion with Dr. Forget and McIntyre with Mary Silvani. We'll have some closing remarks. Then at the end of the evening, we'll be doing some networking. And then there's also an opportunity book signing with Dr. Forget's latest book. And I think we have about 70 copies available. So that will be happening up in the mezzanine. Tonight, I did talk about social media. It's an opportunity for us to interact with some people who focus on the topic of basic income. And we're trying to be as open as possible, so there's at least 3 ways that you can participate. You can tweet using the hashtag MakeItBigAlberta, or AB. You can also email to makeitbigab@gmail.com. And, all right, hands up, show your little white cards. Who's got white cards? Everybody's hand should be going up. All right, perfect. So you can pass your cards to volunteers. Think of it like a tennis match. We're going to have people running up and down the aisles very safely to pick up your cards. So as soon as you're ready for the card to be passed, please pass it to your neighbor to the aisle, and a volunteer will come and grab those. And then we'll be collecting those, and hopefully there'll be opportunities for us to ask those questions to the experts. For anybody who actually has difficulty potentially writing on a card, you can also ask for a volunteer, and they'll be more than happy to write a question on a card for you. All right? So, of course, an event like tonight would not happen without generous sponsors. And I would like to just take a really quick moment to list off all of the sponsors who have been a part of tonight and tomorrow. We have the Calgary Foundation. We have the Calgary Public Library, of course. We're in this beautiful space with those thingies out front. End Poverty Edmonton, Human Elements Canada, Hillhurst Sunnyside Community Association, Enough for All, the Alberta College of Social Workers, the Institute for Community Prosperity at Mount Royal University, the Calgary and District Labour Council, the Alex Community Food Centre, Calgary Transit, the Disability Action Hall, the O'Brien Institute for Public Health, and of course, Basic Income Calgary. So please, if everyone could join me in thanking these generous sponsors. Okay, enough of me. So, I would like to introduce Dr. Evelyn Forget. Dr. Forget is an economist and professor in community health sciences at the University of Manitoba. She's best known for her work on basic income, which includes a reanalysis of the Mincome Basic Income experiment that took place in Manitoba in the 1970s. She's published widely and often advises governments, international bodies, and First Nations on health policy. Her most recent book is Basic Income for Canadians, the Key to a Healthier, Happier, More Secure Life for All. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to Dr. Evelyn Forget.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here tonight, and I'm especially happy to see so many people who are interested in basic income. What I'd like to do tonight is to talk about some of the projects that we've tried in Canada, some of the experiments that have been tried. And before I begin, I want to start by talking about what exactly we mean when we talk about basic income.
Can you adjust the mic a bit, please? Move the mic a bit to your right.
To my right. How's that?
We can also, if this is a bother, we can also move to a handheld. Let's try that.
How's that? Any better?
Would you prefer the podium or handheld?
Handheld.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks very much. We're on? Great. Old school. Okay, what do we mean by a basic income? Basic income sets a floor. No matter what happens in your life, no matter how many bad decisions you've made, how much bad luck you've run into, how many terrible things happen to you in your life, a basic income promises that you're always going to have the resources you need to live a modest life with dignity. What makes it different from provincial income assistance? The biggest difference is that a basic income is available to people who rely on social assistance, But it's also available to people in the workforce. That is, it provides not only a living for people with no other income, but it provides a top-up for low-waged working people. The second and probably most important aspect of basic income is that it's unconditional. So your basic income won't be taken away from you if you break a rule, if your paperwork is not in on time, if you don't meet with your caseworker for a scheduled meeting for whatever reason, if you break one of the dozens and dozens and dozens of rules that govern all provincial income assistance programs, basic income won't disappear. It won't be reduced. It'll always be available to you. All right. Shouldn't this be moving? There we are. Okay, why do we need a basic income? The basic purpose of a basic income is to reduce the depth and breadth of poverty among those on provincial income assistance, to supplement the income of low-waged working people, and as the economy is changing, to fill the gaps between all the other social programs that exist out there. The gaps in our social safety net that exist because of offshoring and a changing labor market, that exist because of technological change, that exists because of the rise of precarious labor, because good middle-class jobs are disappearing and being replaced by service sector jobs that pay much less and offer much less security. So what I'm going to do tonight is to talk about Canada's history of basic income experiments. I'm going to talk about the old Mincome experiment that was conducted in Manitoba in the 1970s, how that influenced the recently canceled Ontario basic income experiment, and finally, where we go from here. How a basic income challenges us all to ask ourselves about the kind of society we want to build. So Mincome. In 1974, the federal government in the province of Manitoba decided to conduct a guaranteed annual income experiment. Families received funding under that experiment between 1975 and 1978. And the basic purpose of the experiment was to answer one single question. If you offer people a basic income, would they stop working? Would they work less? It was run in 2 sites in the province of Manitoba. A small number of people in the city of Winnipeg participated, and the entire town of Dauphin, which is a town of about 10,000 people, participated in the experiment. Everybody who lived in Dauphin received the same promise. If your income falls below an agreed upon threshold, you'll receive a top-up under the program. You'll always have access to a guaranteed minimum. It was designed as a negative income tax, what today we'd call a refundable tax credit. So if you had no money from any other source, you'd receive a certain basic guarantee. As your income increased, the guarantee would decline, but it would decline less than proportionately, until finally your income would reach a point where the basic income disappeared altogether. So for every dollar you earn, the benefit declined by 50 cents. So what happened to the project? Well, the families were paid and the data was collected. The experiment lasted for the full planned term, but it lost political support midway through. For those of you who are old enough to remember the 1970s, you'll remember it as a time of political and economic turmoil. Those of you who are too young to remember it have to remember your economic history class. This was a period when inflation reached about 13%. Interest rates were topping at 19%, 20%. People were having trouble paying their mortgages. And that meant that governments became very fragile. The provincial government fell in 1976, and Manitoba's first ever NDP government was replaced by the Progressive Conservatives. No government likes to put money into the special projects of its predecessors, and so they weren't keen on continuing the project. The experiment ended as planned, but the researchers had run out of money by that time, and they demanded more funding for analysis. They were told by the government to archive the data for future analysis. What does archived data look like? Well, in the 1970s, it meant that they ended up with 1,800 bankers' boxes full of paper data. And in fact, we kind of lost track of it for a little while. It was sitting in an office suite in downtown Winnipeg, and two levels of government were arguing about who would pay the rent. It was recovered. It was recovered, at least the Winnipeg data was recovered in the 1980s, and a couple of labor economists did the analysis to answer the basic question that the experiment was designed to answer. Would people stop working? And what they found was that adults with real jobs really didn't react at all. There was a very, very small reduction in the number of hours worked. Two groups, however, had larger reactions. New mothers. In the 1970s, maternity leaves were 4 weeks long, and a lot of new mothers thought was a very modest maternity leave, and not surprisingly, some of them used the income stipend to buy themselves longer parental leaves. The second group of people who reduced their work hours were, and here the language is really important, young attached males. Young men who didn't have families reduced the number of hours they worked really significantly. So that was where things stood for a long time. About 20 years later, I went looking for some of those young unattached males because I wanted to answer a couple of questions about basic income. I wanted to know what happened to quality of life. I wanted to know what decisions people made about education. And especially, I wanted to know what happened to their health. And I focused on the small town of Dauphin because it was a saturation site, because everybody in town participated in the experiment. And the first thing I did was to look for some high school data. And you can think of this graph as a high school completion rates. So each bar represents a different part of Manitoba. The first of each triple, the light purple, represents the town of Dauphin. The dark purple represents Winnipeg, and the cream color bar represents the rest of Manitoba. And until 1974, before Mincome came along, you see pretty much what you'd expect to see. That is, there's no difference between Dauphin and the rest of Manitoba. Kids in Winnipeg were more likely to finish high school than kids in the countryside. 1975, families in Dauphin start receiving support, and look what happens to the bar in Dauphin. Suddenly, kids in Dauphin are more likely to finish high school even than the city kids. By 1976, that bar goes above 100%. That means there were more kids in grade 12 than there were in the previous year's grade 11. People who'd left school were coming back to school to finish high school. 1977, 1978, we had almost all kids finishing high school in Dauphin. 1979, the money stops flowing. We go right back to where we started from. You can ignore that last set of bars. They built a couple of high schools outside of Winnipeg and messed up my data. So who are those young unattached males? Turns out we're talking about 16-year-old boys. I found a number of the participants in the experiment, and they told me that before Mincome came along, they'd been under a fair amount of family pressure to become independent as quickly as they could so that the family money could go to younger brothers and sisters. When Mincome came along, some of those families decided to encourage their sons to stay in school a little bit longer. So I want to ask you to imagine the differences and opportunities that those young men would have faced over the next 40 years. The kids who left with incomplete high school got jobs. They got really good jobs at the time in agriculture, in manufacturing. Employment in agriculture and manufacturing collapsed subsequently. They would have experienced bouts of unemployment, low wages. The kids who finished high school had all opportunities open to them. So, now, I was particularly interested in hospitalization, in health, and lucky for me, Manitoba has just signed on to Medicare in 1971. So I was able to find everybody in Dauphin in the Medicare database. The blue line on this diagram represents Dauphin. The red line represents a matched group of controls, so people the same age, the same sex, and so on. And what I found was that during MINCOM, hospitalization rates fell 8.5% for people who lived in Dauphin relative to the matched controls. When I looked more closely at the codes, the reasons for why people were hospitalized, I found out that the reduction was due to two causes. First of all, a reduction in accidents and injuries. Accidents and injuries include almost all acute hospitalizations, and it's always strongly related to poverty. But even more interesting from my perspective, there was a huge decline in hospitalizations with a mental health component. I found that visits to family doctors declined among people who received a basic income, and the only thing that was statistically significant were visits related to mental health. That is, people didn't go to the doctor so often complaining of anxiety, depression, family conflict. So, how did the families perceive MINCOM to have affected their lives? This is one of the participants from MINCOM, Amy Richardson. She died a few years ago. She had 6 children and a sick husband, a husband who actually died during the experiment. And her comment was that it was to bring your income up to where it should be. It was enough to add some cream to the coffee. Everybody was the same, so there was no shame. Several years later, the province of Ontario decided to use the MINCOM experiment to design a basic income guarantee experiment. This was a 3-year experiment, and it included 4,000 subjects in 3 different areas of the province. Its purpose was no longer to look just at labor market participation, but they were interested in how a basic income would reduce poverty. They were particularly interested in following the knock-on effects of poverty. They wanted to know what the effects would be on mental and physical health, child development, and so on. And in particular, Ontario was especially interested in knowing if it would make people healthier and reduce pressure on the healthcare system. Who qualified? 18 to 64-year-olds. And the reason they focused on 18 to 64-year-olds is because in Canada, 2 groups of people already have access to a form of basic income. The Canada Child Benefit is a kind of a basic income for families with dependent children. People over age 65 with low incomes have access to the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which is another form of basic income. What did people receive? Just shy of $17,000 if they were single, about $24,000 if they were couples. They received the Canada Child Benefit on top of that, and people with disabilities received an extra $500 a month. How would they know if the experiment worked? They intended to measure a whole range of different outcomes: mental and physical health, career decisions, savings, and so on. What happened? Well, we all know what happened. The sampling was complete by April 2018. There was a provincial election, the Liberals were replaced by the Conservatives, and the project was canceled. When the experiment was canceled, it was canceled in a particularly brutal way. It was announced to the press that the experiment would be canceled. And for 2 months, people who participated in the experiment had no idea what would happen to them. And so what happens when you cancel a basic income experiment? One of the things that happened is that people started to reach out and explain what was happening to their health. Just one example here. This is an email that's shared with permission of the person who sent it to me. She writes, "I'm having bandwidth problems due to the trauma that makes some of my other trauma symptoms flare up, sort of. Migraines that went away in the pilot started to come back. They started coming back after the election, though. I could see the handwriting on the wall." Basic Income Canada managed to survey a number of the Ontario participants to find out what people were spending the money on when they received basic income. And they spent it as you'd expect them to spend it. They used the money to improve their living conditions. They paid down debt. They rented better housing and improved their diet. They reported that they were less stressed, that their mental and physical health improved, and many registered in community college. So we're seeing the same kinds of things happening in Ontario that happened in the Income Project. The Canadian results mirror what we've seen happening in other experiments around the world. What happened in Finland? In Finland, people reported that they were healthier and happier under a basic income. They were no less likely to work than people who didn't get a basic income. And their trust in government and in society increased as well. There are a number of basic income experiments in low and middle income countries all over the world. And they all show the same thing. People don't work less when they receive a basic income. They report that their health and well-being improves. People spend the money in reasonable ways to improve their lives. So where do we go from here? In particular, do we need another experiment? Experiments are costly. They're costly in terms of time and money and the human disruption of the subjects that are participants. I think we already know how a basic income affects people. And we already know that we can afford a basic income. I want to report that when the Ontario experiment rolled out, the parliamentary budget officer was asked what it would cost if we rolled out the Ontario experiment across the entire country. And he came up with an estimate, a gross estimate of $76 billion a year, which is a tremendous amount of money. But then he pointed out that we're already spending a lot of money to deliver programs and income support to low-income people. And if you look at what the federal government's spending alone and deduct that, the net cost to the federal government would be $43 billion. That doesn't take into account the $20 billion a year that the provinces collectively spend to deliver income assistance. So the net cost of delivering a basic income, like the Ontario Basic Income Scheme to all Canadians, would be $23 billion a year. And just to put that into context, we spend $23 billion every year to deliver the Canada Child Benefit. We spend more than twice that to deliver pensions to seniors. Every year, we spend $122 billion in tax expenditures that benefit mainly high-income people. $23 billion is about 6% of federal government expenditure. This is something a country like Canada can afford. I think what we need is leadership to develop a basic income policy. So let me just end by asking you again, what kind of a society do we want to build? It really is all about choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Forget. Before we jump into our fireside chat without the fire, we're going to show a video. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind everybody about sharing your questions. Anyway, share your questions, either write them on the cards or through Twitter or email, and we're going to show a video, and then we'll move into the next portion.
What can I say? It's a subject that touches me personally, as I know there have been times in my life that I would.
I think we're rebooting the computer, perhaps. I don't know. So, how about that local sports team, hey? That's a great question. I'm going to look into that and I'll get back to you.
What can I say? It's a subject that touches me personally, as I know there have been times in my life that I would have benefited from having such a universal basic income.
I think one of the slides that, as I just
Well,
do a soft
the way I
show
grew
here,
up,
one of the slides that really
did
stood
not grow
out
up
for me was those
remotely
results with respect to
rich.
the high school
We
graduation.
were poor,
That was pretty
hurting for
incredible.
food all the time. Having universal basic income would help us be
you
able
tell a
to
joke now.
afford food, shelter.
Here we go, perfect.
What can I say? It's a subject that touches me personally, as I know there have been times in my life that I would have benefited from having such a universal basic income.
Well, the way I grew up, did not grow up remotely rich. We were poor, hurting for food all the time.
I keep telling them to get a Macintosh, but
What can I say? It's a subject that touches me personally, as I know there have been times in my life that I would have benefited from having such a universal basic income.
Well, the way I grew up, did not grow up remotely rich. We were poor.
yeah, okay. All right, perfect. Well, why don't we move into our fireside chat? I think we have some volunteers that are bringing out some chairs right now. So perhaps I could ask Dr. Forget to come back to the stage. Well, now how about a fireside chat without the fire and without the video? Joining Dr. Forget, we have Dr. Lynn McIntyre. And Dr. Lynn McIntyre is a Professor Emerita of Community Health Sciences in the Department of Community Health Sciences, Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. She retired from her active faculty position in November of 2015. However, she continues to be involved in the research and population health advancement. Dr. McIntyre holds both a medical degree and a master's degree in community health and epidemiology from the University of Toronto. She is also a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada in Public Health and Preventative Medicine, and a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Dr. McIntyre's research is focused on policies that reduce household food insecurity, inadequate access to food due to financial constraint. This has led her to evaluate the role of seniors' pensions as a model of basic income and its effect on health, mental health, and food insecurity. She also serves as a member of the Advisory Council of the Basic Income Canada Network. Please welcome to the stage and to the fireside chat, Dr. Lynn McIntyre.
Thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks to the audience, such good-humored folks. So I have to say that this book is absolutely extraordinary, and it is very strongly recommended reading. It's full of yellow highlights because of the words that really express really important concepts. So I'm going to start my first question for Evelyn here, is that you've been on the book tour, and you've also been on innumerable interviews from TVO to CBC, whatever. So my question is really, what chapter are you sorry that you left out of your book now that you've heard all the questions?
There we are. That's actually a trick question. It's a perfect book. It includes everything. I think I would have, when I originally wrote the book, I wrote it like an economist writes a book, right? I had all kinds of charts and data and chapters and chapters on financing. And my editor said, try again. And so there's a lot less of that in there than I would have liked to have included.
So your discussion on youth, and in the book, Evelyn talks about the 18 to 25-year-olds. It's a very interesting analysis. And my question is really, do you think that youngest age group that is now currently covered by guaranteed annual income should be included in a basic income program? And if not, why not?
Yeah, it's always hard to talk about when a basic income ought to start. We know that youth poverty is a very big deal in Canada. We know that some of the poorest people, we know that a large portion of homeless people are kids aging out of care. Kids, 18-year-olds, 18 to 20-year-olds. We know that they're having some of the hardest time in the labor market. And so something really has to be done for youth poverty, to address youth poverty. And the question that some people have raised is a basic income really what we ought to be offering 18-year-olds, or should we be offering a more structured program that includes job training and a certain set of expectations? And a lot of people point to, children living in their parents' basement, kids who, have certain opportunities and choose not to take them. And I think that there's a very difficult age group there between 18 and 25 where the needs are extremely high, but the costs of bad decisions are also extremely high. And so some people have proposed the concept of a participation income, where people in that age group receive a basic income, but only if they fulfill certain obligations, participating, volunteering, training, or something like that.
I think you talked a lot about the maturity or lack of maturity, about needing some guidance, some structure in that, and job readiness as well in that group. It's not just a matter of getting basic income. They need more. But so we are now, you've mentioned 18. Now we have a county government that has recently rolled back our minimum wage for those under the 18 years of age, ostensibly the students, from that well-fought for minimum wage of $15 per hour, so it'll go to $13. So really the question begins with really around the minimum wage strategy as a basic income strategy, and the concept of even less than 18 as well, but probably the first is a minimum wage strategy, a basic income strategy, and then how could you reflect on this?
I think minimum wage and basic income go hand in hand. I think they address different issues. I think we need strong minimum wage legislation because I think it's a matter of social justice. I don't think that a minimum wage is necessarily a good anti-poverty strategy. And I say that because a lot of people earning minimum wage don't live in low-income families. And a lot of people in low-income families have nobody working at minimum wage. And so it's not the most efficient way to address poverty. On the other hand, justice says that people working should be paid fairly for the work that they provide. So I think the two policies address different issues and they need to go hand in hand.
So I'm sure that that when the panel meets and you have your opportunity to fill out your white card, we're going to be talking more about that rollback and minimum income. So you won't remember exactly table 8.1, but this table blew me away, and it basically looks at the proportion of workers over the age of 18 who are paid a minimum wage. And from 2006 to 2016, you have Alberta showing a threefold increase. So this is no longer a rare group. So threefold increase in those who are earning a minimum wage. For that age group, 20 to 24, it's gone from 2.2% to 9%, fourfold increase. And overall, we've got over 27% of that younger age group that are working at minimum wage. So could you,
a very large number.
Very
of
large.
people.
So this is no longer I'm calling it the red circle. When you make it a minimum wage, this is a red circle. You're not going anywhere. So could you perhaps reflect on the trend and what the implications are for basic income?
Well, I think it means that there's a strong role for basic income. If people are working at minimum wage, that's not enough to survive on. And so if we have an economy that can't produce better jobs for people, then we need an alternative strategy to make sure that enough money ends up in people's hands that they can live a reasonable life. And so a basic income becomes a counterpart to an increase in the proportion of the workforce working at low wages, minimum wages.
So you used a term which I hadn't heard before, the compression of low wages. So that trend, that 10-year trend, is that we're actually ever more concentrating people at that end.
One of the things that's happened is that the lowest wage workers have been seeing increases because of legislated increases to minimum wage over time. But the people earning just slightly above minimum wage haven't seen any increases in their wages, and therefore you see a larger and larger proportion earning minimum wage.
So you provide some very hard-hitting comments on how basic income affects different people, including women. And I think you comment as well that the 1970s women are very different than women of today, so we don't even know how they would respond. But could you summarize what you've talked about in terms of basic income, in terms of Indigenous peoples, and in terms of racialized minorities? I mean, two separate sort of storylines.
Yeah. Basic income is particularly important for people who are more likely to experience poverty. Who are those people? In our society, they're women, they're Indigenous people, they're racialized people. To the extent that people suffer discrimination in the labor market, to the extent that they face more pressures and more negative outcomes in their lives, basic income becomes a more and more important support for those groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, I actually also realize this is only one of the truth and reconciliation types of reparations or stories that have to be corrected. And so I think that was also really quite a compelling tale around we still need to work on equity in our society when we deal with this deep poverty, that will not take away racism and it will not take away historical trauma. So
Basic income's just wage, just money. And money doesn't solve all of those issues. What it does is it gives people the capacity to focus on the other problems that they need to address in their lives.
So just a bit about women. So you've said today we don't need another experiment, we need some policy. On the other hand, we don't actually have much data on women in the labor force from the old experiments. So what are the questions that we have about women and basic income going forward?
Questions about women?
No, question like, how they'll respond. And
I guess when people ask me that question, I wonder, are my motivations for working so different from all my male colleagues? I think women today work for exactly the same reason that men today work. They want to pay their rent, they want to buy groceries, they want to feed their kids. And so I don't think that women's reactions are going to be tremendously different from men's. One thing that is different for women is that women still supply a disproportionate amount of the care work that's provided in society. They provide most of the child care. They're usually the ones called upon to care for relatives with disabilities or aged parents. And what that does is it interrupts their capacity to earn in the labor market, and therefore basic income provides a way of valuing that very important labor that just doesn't find value in the labor market. It's a way of ensuring that people receive compensation for the work they're doing and that all of us rely on.
Yeah, certainly, as I was going through school, they kept on doing the caregiving value. They tried to give, this type of fictitious sort of money for it, and now that this is an opportunity to truly pay for it.
That's right.
So recently, I've been told to put this a little bit closer, so now I hope it's easier to hear. A social collaborative in Calgary, many of the sponsors of this organization paid two eminent economists, including one that was on your slide, to actually examine how Alberta's tax system could be redeployed in terms of a minimum income type of process based on that non-refundable tax credit becoming refundable to reduce poverty in this province. So I guess what I'd like you to do is and for those that are not aware, you might want to give some highlights, but or I could, but it's like, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of using our refundable tax credit or the tax system as the sole way of producing a basic income? And we've got our Alberta example, but there was also a study for Canada, published by the same authors.
Yeah, the examples I gave in the slides conceived of basic income as a replacement for income as provincial income assistance alongside a top-up for low-waged working people. What the proposal for Alberta does is something quite different. It says, well, we're not going to get rid of provincial income assistance, at least in the short run. We can look at the tax system and we realize that we're spending a lot of money to offer deductions and exemptions, primarily for middle and high income people. Can we take some of those deductions and redeploy money to make, to provide greater support for low-income people? So it's a matter of taking the tax revenue that already exists and reworking it in order to take money away from higher income people and give it to lower income people. So they begin with the assumption that there's no new tax revenue, right? We start with the money we have and we distribute it differently. And that's a really important finding. I think I guess I would call it a partial basic income. There are two things I think that make me a little bit nervous about that proposal. The first is that the amounts are really quite low. We're talking about, I think, $6,000. $6,000 is not enough to live on. It's a very nice top-up if you're receiving income from other sources, but it's not a basic income in and of itself. The other thing that makes me a little bit nervous about that is that it does advantage the poorest people in society, but it disadvantages people who are making really quite modest incomes. So if you take the entire income spectrum and you divide it into tenths, the lowest 10% of the population does better. The lowest 20% of the population does better. By the time you get to the lowest 30% of the population, there are losers under this scheme. These are still very low incomes to be paying. So I have some qualms about the proposal offered, but I do think it's a good first step.
Yeah, the response, to that report from even the funders was this worry about the middle class, that this is not a totally progressive tax system, that the rich are paying their...
No, let me give you an alternative. Right now, we pay in Canada $17 billion a year so that we can offer preferential tax treatment for people who earn capital gains. 90% of the benefits go to the top 10% of income earners. So $17 billion a year for income assistance to the top 10% of income earners. Another $5 billion a year goes to the preferential treatment of dividend income. Again, 90% of the benefits go to the richest 10% of Canadians. It seems to me that we don't have to take money away from very low income workers to support even poorer workers, when there are lots of rich people out there who are benefiting from the tax system we have in place. There are other ways of reallocating income.
So you've been calling for modernization of the tax system, and that's one of the reforms. Perhaps you could maybe say even more about what would real progressive taxation look like in terms of income inequality and how that would figure into the whole basic income achievements.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a very basic level, we ought to recognize that we're already paying quite a lot to provide income assistance for rich people. I don't think that the 10% of Canadians who earn the highest incomes in the country necessarily require all that support. Seems to me we could take a tiny little bit of it and spread it out at the bottom end, and a whole lot of people would be better off. And, the money's there. We've just decided to spend it in a way that benefit well-off, high-income Canadians, because we believe they're the ones who create jobs.
So we get other questions. I'm sure we're going to get on that for the panel. But what I wanted to say next is that now that we've got the Ontario Basic Income pilot has been scrapped,
Yep.
and in Canada as a whole, in Alberta specifically, is this the absolute worst possible political condition since the 1970s for basic income to materialize? Why or why not?
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, when the country's doing well, everybody says, well, we don't need a basic income. Look at all those jobs out there. People should go get a job. When the country's doing badly, they say, well, of course we need a basic income, but this isn't the time to do it because we just can't afford it. So, I don't know what the perfect time for a basic income is. It seems to me that we just need to move forward on this policy. And now is as good a time as any. We should have done it 40 years ago. And we knew we should have done it 40 years ago. And we did move part way towards a basic income. Since the time of Mincome, we introduced the Canada Child Benefit. It took a long time. It took 40 years. But that's sort of a basic income. It's a basic income for families with dependent children. When Mincome was there was no guaranteed income supplement for seniors. That's another kind of a basic income we've subsequently introduced. But in a sense, that's the low-hanging fruit. No one expects seniors to be in the labor market. No, we don't. Most of us don't think 7-year-olds should be out there working for a living. But you know, we get nervous when we start talking about 18 to 64-year-olds. There are still a lot of people who believe that if you offer people a basic income, we're just going to stop working. And I don't know anybody who wants to live on $17,000 a year if they can earn more than that. You know, people like to work. Everybody likes to work. If you think, think about food banks in this country. Most of the food banks in Canada are staffed by volunteers, and many of the volunteers are users of the food bank. They don't get anything for volunteering their labor except maybe a bus ticket and a lunch. And yet some of them are there 40 hours a week working at the food bank because they want to work. You know, people line up to take minimum wage jobs. In some cases, they line up to take the worst jobs I can imagine because they want to work. People work not necessarily because of the intrinsic value of their job, but because they like the people they work with, they want to feel useful, they want structure in their days. Most people really do want to work. And that's what the evidence tells us every time we run an experiment.
Thanks. So basic income has some surprising friends and then also some surprising foes. And I just wanted perhaps you could comment on who our surprising friends are, but also who perhaps our surprising foes are.
It's really hard to sell basic income to progressive people when they remember that Richard Nixon and Milton Friedman were great fans of basic income. So yeah, there are a lot of people on the political right who think that basic income is a good thing, and that always makes people on the left a little bit nervous, and for good reasons, I think. You know, there's a common sense, I think, to offering basic income that we can all see. Nobody wants to spend money inefficiently. We might quarrel about what the level of basic income should be or exactly how it should be structured, but everybody wants to see the money spent well, and most people want to see our friends and neighbors and relatives living better lives than they currently do. Surprising enemies. I'm not sure I want to answer that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was reading, I mean, you used some very great industrial leaders who said, not just from the right, but saying these great industrial leaders are saying we need basic income. Those are ones like Elon Musk that are driving a new economic sort of reality. But some of the foes are those that have got extraordinarily complex client groups of interest, and they seem to feel threatened by us getting a basic income. And perhaps you could just maybe explain that.
Well, let me give you one example. I've heard somebody say that in some small and remote communities in Canada, the social workers who deliver income assistance are the only ones who have good jobs, so that we want to protect those good jobs. I think that many unions are nervous about a basic income, in some cases because they think that there are potential disadvantages for their members who deliver current programs. In my opinion, that's not a real risk, partly because I don't think we have too many people working in the system. I think we have too many caseworkers doing the wrong kind of work, too many social workers doing the wrong kind of work. Most people go into social work because they want to provide programs. They want to help their clients live better lives. And some of them find themselves very disillusioned when they spend their whole day trying to figure out how to get bus tickets to their clients, or trying to find money for a client who needs it, trying to make a system that doesn't work very well work better. So if we could take some of that highly skilled, highly committed labor and free it up to provide the kinds of services they really want to provide, I think people would be very much better off. So I don't think that there's a fear that people are going to lose their jobs if we introduce a basic income. And I think that people are beginning to recognize that, including the unions that represent some of these folks.
So the conversation about basic income naturally is almost entirely about poverty and poverty reduction, but occasionally you remind us about social solidarity and discord and polarization. So maybe you could just remind us why basic income is good for everyone for more than one reason, more than just the reason of income.
I think that we all do benefit when the poorest members of our society have access to the resources that they need to live well. I mean, we do pay for poverty already. We do pay the costs in terms of other social programs. We pay for it in terms of higher health care costs, higher costs associated with criminal justice, higher costs associated with child and family services, the child welfare system when kids end up in care, because families don't have the resources they require to provide adequate lives. So I think as a society we do benefit when everyone has access to those resources.
Yeah, I think you were citing the story in Finland around trust and community cohesion, inclusion, volunteering, etc. And these are all very important ways of having a society that's fully healthy. So the question about, in Basic Income Calgary, one of the absolute tenets of the 5 principles is that it's an individual-based benefit. And so it's an area that you actually discuss as kind of controversial, whether it's individual or family, etc. Could you maybe just outline those arguments about whether or not basic income is an individual benefit and the role of the units, family member units, in terms of trying to figure out what to design?
I think that at one level, basic income should be individually designed, right? Everybody should have access to a basic income. It shouldn't depend on family income. And one of the reasons for that is because it offers everybody the freedom to make decisions about their lives. It offers people the opportunity to leave less than satisfactory marriages, for example. People can leave abusive relationships. This is a good thing. On the other hand, some people argue that there are economies of scale. It doesn't cost twice as much for 2 people to live as it does a single person. 2 people sharing an apartment face fewer costs than 2 people living separately. And so there's an argument that that perhaps basic income should be based on family income. I think that that's there's no easy answer to some of those questions. It becomes more expensive to offer a basic income based on individual income. In this country, we pay our income taxes as individuals, but we receive our benefits as families. So if you think of the child benefit, for example, it's based on family income. So I think that controversy exists. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it, and I think that people will make arguments on both sides.
And I'll end with this this question. Not only you, but most people that have been studying this topic have suggested that basic income is inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as our 2 degrees C climate change target, it's inevitable. So if it is inevitable, how do we start? The last question. How do we start? But what is that? What's the time period towards inevitability? When would it? What does that look like? And everyone agrees it's inevitable. So what are they saying? 50 years, 30 years, 10?
One thing economists are really, really bad at is forecasting. I'm not sure I want to say that. I think that we are slowly moving towards a basic income. I think that there are a lot of things coming together. I think we're recognizing, people have denied for a long time that there are permanent changes taking place in the labor market. Well, I don't think we can deny that anymore. It's obvious that those things are happening. So I think we are moving towards a basic income. When that happens, I don't want to make a guess.
I wanted to thank Evelyn so much and to recommend you at the end of the evening to think about buying this book. And I don't even get a commission. Thanks for your real attention. Thanks.
Thank you both very much for that. I think we have a couple elves that are going to be bringing out a couple more chairs for us. We're going to move right into the fireside, the Q&A discussion period. So I think all those questions that have been rolling in, they're going to be handed up to us. But I did just want to shout out to Grant Neufeld, who had a great comment on Twitter. I've read about increased entrepreneurship with the UBI. In addition to the many social, health, educational, and anti-poverty outcomes, there's massive economic potential that could result in a net monetary gain versus the cost of basic income. And he sees UBI as an investment, not cost. So,
Great point.
Perfect. So we've got a couple chairs coming out.
While that's being set up, there are a number of people standing in the back, and there's a lot of seats still open. If you want to come down and have a seat.
Please do. If you'd like to have a seat, we've got plenty of seats up at the front along the sides as well. And at this point, I'll actually start to introduce Mary, who's going to be joining the panel discussion. So I'd like to introduce Mary Silvani, who graduated from St. Mary's Humanities 101 program in Calgary, a program designed to help adults living in poverty who have experienced barriers to education gain university-level education. 2 years ago, she transferred into the Bachelor of Liberal Studies program with a minor in history as a part-time student. This fall, Mary will be transferring into the Bachelor of Arts in Social Justice and Catholic Studies at St. Mary's University. So, yeah. Mary defines herself as a human rights advocate and has firsthand experience with the Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped, or AISH. As part of her education journey, she's been exploring various social justice issues and has both written and presented on the topics of basic income. When asked why she wanted to participate in tonight's panel, her response was, "I think it's important for people to learn about what basic income is so they can talk about it with their family, friends, and colleagues. I also think it's important to break the stigmas and myths related to what society thinks of people with disabilities and for people living in poverty." So everybody, please welcome to the panel discussion, Mary Silvani. I'll give that to you. Perfect.
Lots and lots of questions.
Well, we have lots of questions. So, but before we get to these very valuable questions, Mary, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. And my question is, what was your first introduction to the concept of basic income, and what was your initial response?
Well, my first interaction with basic income was a couple of years ago when I did the first panel with Dr. McIntyre. I was asked by someone at the Action Hall to talk about basic income, and they gave me a book called Utopia for Realists, which is also a really good book if you check it out here at the library, about basic income. It kind of piqued my interest that it didn't have any of the eligibility criteria that AISH and Alberta Works did. It just required you basically to be alive and be an adult.
Perfect. Anybody who knows me knows that I like to ask 3 questions of people. And those 3 questions really revolve around what's going well for you, what's a challenge for you, and what is a hope for the future. And we talked about how we may not have enough time for me to ask those questions to all 3 of you, but because we've kind of skipped over the video technical issues, we have a little bit of more free time. So perhaps I'll start with you, Dr. McIntyre. With respect to the concept of basic income, what do you think is going well?
Well, I think people are really interested. I mean, we're filling this room. We filled other rooms. We've got 15,000 people on the Basic Income Canada network email list and so this is actually a topic that we're seeing repeatedly on political platforms. These are not necessarily always the winning party, But we're seeing it provincially, we're seeing it municipally, and we're seeing it federally. And it's being talked about a lot. So it really is momentum going on this idea, and there are a lot of people speaking very much more intelligently about it than some of the early days where it was, just basically you want to give somebody free money. It's not, that conversation is so old. Now we're talking about these very nuanced stories about individual versus family. We're talking about the model. We're talking about what taxes we're talking about.
And what do you see as a challenge?
I think the challenge is that this story is not being coupled with the conversation about what kind of Canada do we want? How shall Canada move forward to be a socially just society, a society of inclusion, a society of reduced inequities, a society that we value, where people are happy? That is the conversation that needs to be coupled with basic income, not necessarily the tax model. And if we see anything from even the earliest results of basic income experiments, is that people are happy. Their neighbors are noticing. They've got more family life. We have June the 15th is Neighbor Day. We need that to be every day. And that's what is basic income. That's the coupling that is the challenge to make for people.
That also sounds like a hope for the future.
Well, I'm a population health researcher, which is what we care about, not just the lowest element of society, but everyone and through the gradient. And so my hope is that everyone in Canada will see basic income is good for them as well as for all of us. And so I think with that we can move forward.
Perfect. Great. Mary, let's move to you. What's going well from your perspective?
I think the fact that we're talking about it here tonight, and the fact that we're talking about it at home, and we're talking about it in our communities and with our schools. The fact that more schools are also getting on board and doing social justice issues and addressing those things, like the Humanities 101 program and all that. I think, though, that we still need to talk more about it, because for me, what opened my eyes when I read Evelyn's book is I was surprised when I saw the 18 to 24-year-old males. I was surprised to hear the entrepreneurs talking. Like, they're back, because I don't know those things. I'm not in that shoe.
Right.
So it needs to kind of become a more rounded conversation, including everyone. And
what do you see as the challenge facing?
I think greed is a huge challenge. Because, I mean, the top 10% don't want to, like, spread the money that they have with everyone else.
So building off of that, what would a hope be for the future?
My hope is that we understand that it's kind of a win-win situation for everyone. It's not leaving anyone out. It's not putting people in silos, and it's not labeling them.
Perfect. Thank you. And Evelyn, so what's going well?
I think one of the things that I'm really pleased to see is that lots of people are prepared to give basic income a hearing now who wouldn't have a few years ago. There was a question on the National a couple of weeks ago. Somebody had written in and asked whether basic income would be part of the federal election coming up in October. And it was the at-issue panel, and all four of the participants took the question very seriously and discussed it in a very serious way. That wouldn't have happened even, I think, 5 years ago. I think basic income would have been dismissed by at least some of the panelists as being just totally unrealistic, something that's not worth spending time on. You know, unicorn, fairy dust. People now recognize, people in positions of authority in our community now recognize that basic income is possible. And we should be talking not just about whether a basic income is worth thinking about, but how we should start moving towards a basic income and how exactly it should be structured and what are the details about the kind of basic income we want to introduce. I see that as a very positive step. What's going not so well? One of the things that's going not so well is that I think the rhetoric about basic income is shifting very, very quickly. The conversation is changing very quickly. There's still opposition to basic income. Not very many years ago, the opposition to basic income would have dismissed it on the grounds that, what do we need a basic income for? There's no reason, there's no evidence that this is useful for anything. Well, we have a lot of evidence saying basic income is pretty good. It leads to some pretty good results in terms of health, in terms of human flourishing. So they moved off that. And then they said, well, of course, we couldn't have a basic income because of all those labor market disincentives. If we offer a basic income, people will just stop working. Well, we've got a lot of evidence now that says, well, no, they don't stop working, they just continue. And so they moved off that. And then the next line of attack was, well, of course a basic income would be a good thing, but we just can't afford it. I mean, it's just way, way too expensive. Well, we've got answers to that too. You know, we can afford it. And now what I'm hearing is people focused on the details. Now, I said a minute ago that was a good thing, but now I'm hearing, well, it's just too complex. You know, it's just too complex. You know, it's such a hard thing. If we introduce it, there are all these other policies, and it's going to cause trouble. And I keep thinking, well, you know, we've got lots of policies out there. We've managed to introduce them. We introduced a child benefit. That's a complex policy too. But the opposition is shifting very, very quickly, and I think sometimes we're not keeping up with it when we talk about basic income.
And a hope for the future.
Hopes for the future. I would love to live in a society where everybody has the security of knowing, just like we do in some sense with healthcare. Everybody has the security of knowing that if we need a basic income, it's there for us. Imagine how you'd live your life differently, the kinds of risks you might be prepared to take. You mentioned a minute ago entrepreneurship. I can think of people who like to spend time creating artworks of various types. People who'd like to do other kinds of things. Imagine if you had that security, how your life would be different. That would be great.
Okay, so getting into the questions here, we have a couple that are sort of aligned. Does BI replace other supports? So social programs, drug coverage, dental, vision, etc.
Yeah, I just want to, so I think that Basic Income Canada, Basic Income Calgary, and Evelyn are absolutely clear we are not replacing the fundamental social safety net programs that are other than income assistance. And we will always need our healthcare system. Pharmacare has to come forward because otherwise all you would be doing is spending all of your income, basic or not, on buying drugs, not eating, or not eating and buying, or eating, and not buying drugs. So the pharmacare program is not something that we're arguing against for basic income. It's all part of this progressive society where we actually learn how to protect people. So the baddie that is, I think, why there was upset around the proposal from Alberta on refundable tax credits is that the income assistance program is means tested. It's also mean. It's also stigmatizing. It also takes away dignity, and nobody wants to save that one. We want a basic income.
Is there anything else?
The way I explain basic income to people who don't really understand it, I kind of explain it like it's icing on a cake. So the cake being AISH, Alberta Works, CPP, whatever it is, whatever your source of income is. And then the basic income is the icing. It's the thing that brings you to the poverty line. It's the thing that means that you're not lining up every month and admitting to Calgary Transit you have a low income. Or not going up to AISH and having to always ask, what's your client number? Or in AISH's case, they always ask me, can we speak with your mommy? Like, you're not dealing with those things as often. It's making you feel like a person.
Right. So building off of that, perhaps, financial insecurity always comes with social stigma. So how is basic income better than other available supports, especially when it comes to stigma? How is it more, quote unquote, dignified?
Yeah, I could take that one. Well, I'll admit, when I got into the AISH program, Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped, I was really very upset. I was upset for 4 days. I cried for 4 days because I didn't want to be labeled as severely handicapped because all the other words that come with it, like retard, slow, clumsy, all that stuff. Poverty, on the other hand, that one also comes with a lot of stigma. You can't do anything. You'll never amount to anything because you don't have any education. And I think at school we're defining that one a bit. But at the same time, that when, for example, if someone was to apply for a job and they look at someone's address and see they're from the Calgary Drop-In Center, the chances of them being employed is not very good. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really have nothing to add. That's very good.
Well, I wanted her to add the basic income results that you found on shame were remarkable. That this notion of people don't feel ashamed to go to a family doctor.
Yeah.
They don't feel ashamed to use the workers' comp when they've had an injury. So the basic income experiments have shown great sense of being satisfied and no one feeling, the recipient, the neighbor, or others, that this was in fact a welfare handout. The narrative is gone because no one's judging your behavior. No one is providing these rules. So it's not going, I mean, there are all types of other isms, classism, you know, and racism, etc. And that's why I wanted to make the point in the Fireside chat that there's still equity to unfold on other aspects. But basic income is actually a major alleviation of the poverty stigma, particularly those that are on the current assistance programs from government.
I can kind of give an example of that. I am a client of the Alex Health Center. When I'm there, I'm treated like a human being. No, I don't have to explain my income, whatever. I just get the help that I need. But the minute that I step into a walk-in clinic, things start to change. I see that there's signs on the door that, you know, you have to pay for a doctor's note. You have to pay for this, you have to pay for that. And then when I get some sort of diagnosis and they offer some sort of treatment, they say, here's the bill. I'm like, well, I can't afford it. Like, what, you can't afford it? Why can't you afford it? I'm like, I don't really want to explain that. And that's something that I tend to forget that people have to explain when they go to their doctors when they're not in an agency that is as supportive as the Alex is.
So speaking about maybe not having enough, one of the questions we have here is, what is enough to live on? Specifically, what about in different regions across Canada? So, you know, obviously there are different costs of living. I lived for close to 10 years in Fort McMurray, and I know for organizations that had national salaries, they really struggled with trying to keep employees up there. So how does this roll out to different regions where there's different costs?
I think that there are different kinds of proposals. And to my mind, I kind of draw a parallel with the way we deliver other social programs. So when we give people OAS, we don't give higher rates in big cities, for example, in Toronto or Vancouver. We give everybody the same basic amount. And I think I see basic income operating the same way. In those communities where there are higher costs associated with housing, for example, like Vancouver or Toronto, or if I think about food costs in the north in Canada, these require additional programs. And those programs are best offered, I think, at the provincial or the municipal level to deal with very specific circumstances. So housing is a big one. You know, you can't deal with the cost of housing in Toronto and Vancouver through a basic income. You need a different kind of program. And similarly, you can't deal with the cost of food in the north by just boosting a basic income. You need a better program that actually addresses some of those root causes. So I think that's why we talk about basic income being basic income plus. It doesn't do everything. It does one thing.
Well, that ties into the next question is, what can municipalities do to support basic income in their regions?
Provide the services that
municipalities know far better than the federal government does are needed in the region. So things like subsidized transit, for example, and access to particular programs that local people need.
So we're very, very proud of our municipal council and that of Edmonton, and of course the Canadian Federation of Municipalities for having voted that we need a basic income in Canada. These are, urban poverty is the preponderance of poverty. Food insecurity is a City of Toronto problem, well beyond in proportionality to other places. We have no constitutional recognition of our municipalities and our cities, and yet they speak for millions and millions of people, many of whom are very, very disadvantaged. So it really is important for them to continue to fight for this because they are the greatest beneficiaries. And it is also a way that we see a new understanding of our urbanization of our country and what the future of the urban space will look like. It is where I think the first inevitability will come. That's where basic income has to come, is in our cities. And so, they can provide services, but they must be politically united as cities and working, very much through their provinces and the federal level to actually talk about urban poverty and about basic income as an alleviation for that.
I'm getting some real-time feedback via Twitter here. Tweet from Tracy Braun. Imagine how you would live your life differently if you had basic income. Seriously, what would you do? Make art? Go back to school? Start a business? Grow a garden? Spend time with your neighbors? Volunteer? The possibilities are endless. Hashtag make it big AB. So here's a question. Should government dollars not go into training, employment programs, and the creation of new jobs instead? Yeah, should government dollars not go into training, employment programs, and the creation of new jobs instead of basic income?
Why instead? Why not and? I mean, of course we need training programs, of course we need those kinds of things, but it's not a substitute for ensuring that people have access to what they need to live.
Yeah, I probed Evelyn on this youth story because I thought it was actually very constructive. Anyone that travels Europe, particularly some former Soviet Union countries, will see 37–47% unemployment among youth. You'll also see graffiti on every wall, and you'll also see underemployment, where if you go like that, 10 taxis show up. We have to manage, not only for the human capital that's lost, but for our own safety of societies and our solidarity. We have to find a better way for youth. Now we're seeing, even in my own specialty in the Royal College specialties, we're seeing orthopedic surgeons can't get jobs. We've not figured out the notion of, you get a haircut, get a good job. We have to be putting in government strategies to develop, a workforce that's capable of moving ahead. Just this week, we had one of the most eminent scholars in Canada, Dr. David Naylor, chastise our government for having no artificial intelligence, strategy. I mean, this is we've got to be ahead of it in terms of reforming it. And so I do think it's plus for sure, but it's not around, retooling, the minimum wage. It's really around providing as many opportunities as possible for people to move forward. Universities are not the enemy of the people, and sometimes governments seem to think that in terms of what training we do. I mean, Mary has already told me about how it's a great deal to have experience to go to university and to learn. So I actually do think it's now incumbent upon government to provide strategic pathways for this new economy and the jobs that come from it and the personnel for it.
There was a question around what can B.I. do for the future where AI takes over our jobs? Any thoughts?
I'm not one of those people who believes that robots are stealing our jobs. I think that there is always going to be a lot of work for human beings to do. I think what's happening is that the pace of technological change is so rapid and increasing so quickly that we increasingly have a mismatch between the skills of the people who are looking for work and the jobs that need filled. And that leads to a bifurcation. It leads to some very high wages and some very low wages. And unfortunately, the people who are being displaced by the jobs that are disappearing in the middle are going down. They're not getting those high-wage jobs. They're getting the low-wage, precarious jobs. So I think what a UBI can do is it can assist people dealing with an increasingly precarious labor market. It can give people the time to retrain, the opportunity to retrain for other jobs. It can help them ride out this wave of change that's happening so quickly. But I don't think the jobs are going away. There are a lot of jobs out there. That's why we simultaneously have labor shortages and people who can't find work. And this happens all the time.
So it's more a matter of
matching
and retraining. Question here, political question here. Maybe I'll just... So, it seems as though there's only one Green Party that's interested, political, I'm assuming this is a national party, that's interested in basic income. But what kind of interest is there from the different political parties with respect to this?
Actually, the Liberal Party of Canada has a policy on basic income and has reaffirmed it. The Green Party was very early on accepting it as basic income. The Liberals, even in Alberta, went for it, as did the Alberta Party. So, I mean, we are only seeing one party not supporting it. Others have, the NDP have some union influence, but so there is actually a great deal of support, and it's at a high level. It's not in the details, and I mean, I think our last government was urging us to create the political will and the momentum from the people for basic income, and I think that is also still a relatively reasonable request of a party, is to see that people will support something, and so I think that is our challenge as well.
There's a question, have you been following Andrew Yang in the USA?
Sort of.
Sort of. That's one of the Democratic presidential candidates, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's created quite a buzz. He has, well, what can I say? He's gotten people talking about basic income, and I think that's a very, very important thing. Some of the proposals I've seen are not ones that I would promote, but I mean, I think the whole idea of talking about basic income is a positive thing.
I just wanted to add that, I mean, there are, you know, hundreds of countries in the world, and to look south for any kind of political, I mean, when you're talking about India and you're talking about Scotland, the Scottish part, Finland, the Nordic states, these are the places that we could actually look at in terms of having a very intelligent conversation about basic income and as they develop their models. So the fact that we would even spend a minute considering proposals where, you know, and I was on the board of the American Public Health Association, and I'd say, hello, I am a socialist. You know, I mean, that was a dirty word until, I guess, a few weeks ago. So that these issues of, these are not places that we can actually get political understanding on this topic, but there are many, many great nations, including those lower and middle income nations, that are doing spectacular work as they move towards it.
There's actually a lot of interesting stuff happening in the U.S. too, mostly at the city level as opposed to the federal level. Several cities in the U.S. are actually exploring variations on basic income and wondering what they can offer to their citizens.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so we're entering the lightning round, which means we're going to try and get through as many questions as we can. What has the research come back with respect to BI and the effect on drug and alcohol use? Yeah, so what has the research been with respect to basic income and the effect on drug and alcohol use?
Well, you had many fewer hospitalizations for addictions, and so one would assume that at least the binge drinking and the more harmful excessive use was actually reduced.
In the old one, it would have been alcohol as opposed to drugs. I don't know that there is evidence coming directly out of the experiments. There is some peripheral evidence suggesting that people don't increase their expenditure on harmful substances, but it's not been a focus of most of the experiments.
Okay. What decrease in health spending might we expect?
Well, what do we spend? $250 billion a year on health in Canada. We spend $60 billion plus on hospitals. If you take seriously an 8.5% reduction in hospitalization, I mean, we could sort of generalize from that. I don't know how portable that is. I mean, that was 40 years ago. But I think that we could expect a significant... It's not that we'll see a reduction in healthcare spending. What we'll see is a slower increase in healthcare spending as over time, as our population ages. It'll reduce pressure, I think.
I'm way more optimistic. I actually think the whole thing will be funded by healthcare spending reductions. I mean, poverty is incredibly, incredibly harmful to health, and chronic disease is incredibly difficult. In fact, chronic disease, a diabetic who's poor has a totally different life expectancy than a diabetic who's rich. It doesn't even affect their life expectancy. I actually do think that when you add mental health and chronic disease, and you add the kind of the only social program we have for many people is their visits to health facilities, I think you're going to be able to pay for the whole thing with health care. You heard it from me.
I think people in poverty are also smarter than we think sometimes. Like, for example, when I volunteer at the food center, you would think that people in poverty don't know how to access healthy food, when in fact they actually do. They come up with some fantastic recipes, and we keep repeating them at the Alex, and then we keep adding new things, but the only problem that they're having is the fact that they can't afford to access the healthy food.
Perhaps we've got time for one or two more. What can we do for those of us who are disabled peoples? We are invisible, we're disabled, 80% unemployed.
Start employing them. I'm going to... And I mean, start employing them in jobs that they want to do. Like, for example, I'll use Canada Customs because my dad worked there, and he was legally blind. Instead of putting him where he loves working with the people, they put him in the targeting position, which means he was targeting criminals while he was legally blind. I'm like, how about putting him in a job that he feels that he's safe, that he feels like he wants to be there, that he can contribute? And that's what I think people with disabilities want. They want to have a chance to contribute, whether it be a paid position, a volunteer position, in whatever way they can feel that they are contributing to today's society.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Well, with that, I think we are out of time for that, so I would like to thank all of our three guests on stage. Please join me. I would like to apologize if we didn't get to your question. We're going to make an effort to seek out answers to some of the questions that we weren't able to ask, and we'll be posting those on our social media feed, so you can follow that hashtag along, Make It Big Alberta, over the next day or so, and hopefully we'll have answered your question there. I do want to quickly touch base before we wrap up this evening and allow you access to the delicious food that's back there and the book signing event. But I did just want to talk about what's actually happening tomorrow. We have Sheila Reguer, the chairperson of the Basic Income Canada Network, joining us in the morning to give a keynote session. And then in the afternoon, for the conference participants that are here tomorrow, we actually have breakout sessions focusing on health and income, the future of work and basic income, systems mapping, building policy strategy, and something that I'm going to tease you with. It's called Basic Income Guaranteed. Of course, one more time, I'd very much like to thank our sponsors, for which we would not have been able to share this wonderful information with you. So could I please get one more round of applause for all of our sponsors? And could I actually have, if you were a volunteer that helped put this on, could you stand up if you're in the audience, or if you're at the back, could you just kind of wave your hand? These people really helped this all come together, so a round of applause to them. And at this point, again, I would very much like to thank Dr. Forget, Dr. McIntyre, and Mary Silvani for joining us tonight. Thank you very much for coming. And I would just like to introduce Katrina from the O'Brien Institute for Public Health to come up. And then we will also be bringing up Yvonne to close out tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt. Just really quickly, just a quick comment in terms of what was so valuable for me, and maybe because I'm a researcher, but I'm so fascinated by the evidence. And we have so much evidence and so much data that shows us that basic income is the way to go. We have evidence that shows it's better for people, that it reduces costs, that it can be funded. And it's such, in addition to being about social justice and dignity, you know, we have all of this evidence that says we should be doing this. What it tells me is how powerful political will is, and how difficult it is to make substantive policy change. And I'm going to make a really bold statement on behalf of the O'Brien Institute for Public Health, and I might get in trouble later, but that doesn't scare us. It fuels us, and it fuels me. And I'm so thankful to Basic Income Calgary for inviting us to partner and participate in this amazing event. So big thanks to our speakers, amazing insight, honest, thoughtful, gave us lots to think about and lots to chew on. So very thankful for that. We are very excited to keep moving forward with Basic Income Calgary and finding ways to continue to keep the momentum going forward. So thank you for having us, and thank you for listening.
So I want to thank all of you for coming and helping us discuss basic income, to learn about basic income, to move forward and act on basic income. Thank you for coming, and hope you'll be here for some of the rest of the Make It Big conference as we discuss how we can build Basic Income Alberta and move forward with action. For me, I pick up on Evelyn's "it's inevitable." I think when we expect fairness and justice, that's an expression of hope. And that hope has to be active hope. So we want to invite you to come and join us and work for that hope, for a just society. I know we can do better tomorrow. We just have to do it together, and I want to thank you all for coming and helping us do that. On behalf of Basic Income Calgary, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Safe travels. Please enjoy the food. Please mingle, network. And of course, we have the book signing up at the back in the mezzanine.